Today on Sleeping Time, the options on how this engine is going to know how much air goes in it. Hello, and thanks for sleeping some time with me today. In this episode, we're going to get back to getting this car finished. Well, it won't be finished today, but we're working through it. For those that haven't watched the previous episodes on this car, what I did is I took it right down to every bolt, everything was out of it, and it's a full restoration basically to get it where it is. And I did a few other little things to it that are also talked about in the previous episode, and I'll talk a little further about them as time goes on. So today, what I'm going to tackle on is how I'm going to measure the air that goes into the engine. And I have some options with this. Back when it's stock, this is actually what was used. Let me bring you in for a little closer look on this. Hang on. So most of you know that are watching this, we're going to be familiar with the different options there are to know how much engine, or how the computer knows how much air is going into the engine, so it can apply the appropriate amount of fuel for whatever you're demanding of it. Through the times, there's been different ways to do that. There's different other ways to do that than what I'm going to show here, but I'm going to throw some of the kind of the main ways that are done on these cars. And I've done them all, and I ended up forgetting to do it when I put this upper intercooler pipe that goes into the throttle body, and I'll explain that a little later. But here's the options that exist. Now the stock is this MAF, it's called. It's a mass airflow sensor, and it sends a signal via frequency actually to translate into the ECU. And this just sticks on. You have your air cleaner that fits on here. It kind of fits in there, and that's what we have. Now, this actually had some restrictions in it from the factory when we started modifying these, that it actually could only read so high, so we had to trick the ECU into a few things. We also tricked this signal when we put bigger injectors in. There's lots of information on what we did there and how people still do that. That's not what this episode's about, but just so you know, that was some of the things that were done to get these things faster when this was a limitation, or the sensor was a limitation. And it actually did restrict airflow. You can see, even though I've taken these honeycomb filters out, which you can do, this one is a no-no to do, but if you've done it, you've done it, but it can give you problems. But yeah, there's not a lot of airflow. It really restricts when you're trying to get a lot of air going into that engine. Again, these were made for 200 horsepower, so it worked fine then, but not when you're trying to put 500 plus horsepower into something, obviously. But that still is an option for this car because it's only going to be 350 horsepower. It would work, but the reason I'm not doing that is lack of room, the way I've got things configured in here, and I'll show you some of that as I start digging into the engine, how I'm going to apply things. So this is an option, but I'm not going to use this one. Another option that came along before the next option I'll show you is this is actually a GM mass airflow sensor that people converted to. It needed a little translator. Actually, it was called a MAF translator. A lot of people used in the early days, and other things were out there, other products to do it too. But you can see how that would flow a lot better compared to this. And it also, you could put this after your blow-off valve, so you didn't have to recirculate your blow-off valve. And people like the sound of the open blow-off valve, which didn't really matter, to be honest, but people like the cool sound. So this could go further up the stream, we'll call it, near your throttle body, compared to this goes right at the tip of where your air filter is. So that's an option as well. And I do have this cable that came from ECM Link, which is how the chip that I'm using to make this car run, and that I can get into with a laptop and edit some of the tables and tune it. Well, and that's much further down the road when we get this thing running, but I'll go through some of the tuning as well. But this just actually plugs into the MAF cable, and it's a little adapter for this guy. And it works fine. There's nothing wrong with using this method. In fact, on that red car there that's probably pushing 550 at the wheels, it works fine. I'm using this, and I'm using it upstream, and I don't need to do anything else. It's tuned, it's fine, it runs well. and it works. So I didn't even use this cable. I made my own, but I have the cable for this one if I want to use it. So that is, we'll call it option 2. Again, I'm not going to do that, and I'll show you a little bit when I get into the engine bay here of why, but it's another thing about room and cutting and etc. Now the ultimate thing, so you have no restriction, see these restriction, and what most cars do now is they use air pressure and air intake pressure. So they have a MAP sensor. This is a GM one that we use on here, and it's a pressure sensor or vacuum sensor, depending if you're idling and you're pulling vacuum. But it just has an input from your manifold, measures that, puts a signal to the ECU, and then there's maps what to do with that. It compares also to your intake temperature, which is a probe for that. You don't necessarily need to run this. It's better for trying to tune and to have better running conditions overall, especially if you have a lot of variances in your environment. But that's typically what is in new cars today that aren't electric. And that will go into somewhere to measure the intake temperature. I'm going to put it near kind of the opening of the throttle body is my idea. And as I said, I'm going to. That means this is the option I'm going to use. There's no restrictions then. You have your air filter, and then it's all piping going in. So this is the best way. There's a little more to tune this. I have to agree with that. We used to do a calibration when we had this on and then went over to this. There's better ways of doing that, and that's a whole other video, and there's lots of videos on that as well. So this is the option that we're going to do. So something I did in a previous episode, and I got ahead of myself, is I put this upper intercooler pipe in, and I shouldn't have done that quite yet, because now I got to remove it, because I got to put this, weld this bung in, so I can put the intake air temperature probe in and connect everything. The first option, which I'm not going to do, you can see how I've got things in here, and don't forget that on here there's actually an air filter that sticks out like this, and it's big and bulky, and I can't fit this in the way I've got it configured. I have to change things, and it's really cumbersome. So that's not an option even if I wanted to, and I don't want to anyway. The next thing is this GM airflow sensor, and to put this in, I've obviously got to put it in the piping somewhere, and you need these adapters because of the piping I had. So if I do that, I would kind of put it in here, and it's not that it can't fit, but I would end up having to cut. I'm thinking, yeah, I'd have to cut down there to move this forward, and then this is in the way of trying to get the intake pipe in, and I mean, it's doable, but you can just see that it causes some problems there, and let's get rid of that, or not get rid of it, but let's not do that. So that leaves it to this guy, and what I'm going to do, and that's the bung for this sensor. I'm going to essentially probably put it somewhere over here, and this guy can go, like honestly, it can go lots of places. It can go on the firewall, it can go over here, wherever. I'll figure out as I go here the best place for that. But the first thing is we got to get the bung welded on this and mark that in. So I'm going to start with that. going to do a quick boost test to make sure it's holding pressure after all that changes. The pipe is in. We've got the intake air temperature sensor in, plumbed in. We don't have any boost leaks, which is awesome. I just coiled up this cable. You can see where the pressure sensor is. So we're good to go. So time to get that compressor pipe in, and then I think we've got the engine bay pretty secure with all the components that it needs to have to finally run. So I'm done that part, got it all in, all is done, finished. Pretty much, I think I've got all the engine bay and everything assembled now that needs to be done. I've got a couple tests I'm going to do. I'm going to do a leak down test just to be safe, to make sure I don't see bubbles in the, I did the head gasket by the way, make sure I don't see bubbles in the coolant. A little precaution I did, I caught that once on a really good engine builder once that the head was screwed and it didn't seal right, and before I did anything I did a leak down test, seen bubbles come up. Sure enough, pulled the head and it didn't seat properly. So I like to do that before I do anything. It's just a good safety measure, and it did pay off that time because we didn't damage anything right away and we just resurfaced things and away we went. So what's left on this car now that I've got that done? I mean, there's going to be a lot of tuning, but to get it started, so I've got to get the ECU in, I've got to get the laptop ready. I've actually got a pretty cool in-car computer that I'm going to be using. Got to check some cabling and stuff still, working on that. So I got coolant in it now. I haven't got any brake fluid in, clutch fluid, differential transmission, all that stuff I still got to do. Again, everything was disassembled and cleaned and new and everything, so it's like a new car. You're refreshing and putting everything in, power steering, etc. So I'm going to do that. And getting close, getting excited to finally getting this thing going. Can't wait, and that'll be in some future episodes. At least we'll do the first start anyway and see how well that goes. A little nervous about it, a little excited about it, but just the same, whatever happens, hopefully it works out. There'll always be some tuning or something I'm sure I missed, considering the whole car was disassembled, but that's part of the fun, right? That'll wrap up this episode today, now that I got that in. A few more things to do, as I said. If you want to see that, please like, share, and subscribe. And of course, I've got other content as well that'll be coming, and in the past if you want to check out those videos. Thanks so much for joining me today on Slipping Time. Make sure you enjoy every day, and always make it right.